no regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. Here we are today. It is Pride Month. How are you doing today, Sadie?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I am not doing too shabby myself. Today is June 6th, but you're hearing this probably sometime a couple weeks down the road from that. It is the day that we are doing one of my favorite Pride traditions that we've started doing on this show, which is where we get listener stories, Pride stories, things like that, and we get to read them on the show. And today, I think we have four that we're doing. Four stories, and they're all really good ones. The quality is excellent, and I mean, not to say that anybody's story is not of excellent quality, but there's some really in-depth stuff that we're going to be reading on the show, and that's exciting to us. Before we get into that, the Leaving Eden podcast is the podcast about my BFF and co-host, cult expert, cult survivor, Sadie Carpenter, her life in and escape from the independent fundamental Baptist cult, the cult in which she was raised. We talk about this cult. We talk about other cults. We talk about religion. We talk about fundamentalism. We talk about the real and present threat that cults and cult ideologies pose to society as a whole. And it is our goal to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion. So if you like our show, if you are a fan of our show, then there's a number of things that you can do in order to support us. You can join our Patreon, patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast. You can join our subreddit and our Facebook group. Both of those are called Eden Exodus. Also, we have Pride merch available. We have this year's Pride merch design is a Dinah Housefire themed design, which you can get on everything from a bedspread to a skateboard to a t-shirt. So if you want Dinah Housefire to watch you shower, then you can get that on a shower.
Sorry. That one caught me off guard. Thank you.
Dinah Housefire, the person, is going to be joining us next week for...
Not the shower curtain.
Not the shower curtain. The person is going to be joining us next week for the Leaving Eden Drag Brunch, which is another of our annual traditions. That should be exciting as well.
And on July 3rd, you can have me in your ears nearly twice as much if you want to. I am starting a new show with friend of the pod, Laura, who was a guest for the Casa Bonita episode. We are doing a show called Good Girls, Bad Days, where we talk about grief and mental health and self-care and the wellness industry. I am so excited to bring that show to you. I think it's an amazing complement to this show because what we're going to be talking about is the things that we do to try to make ourselves feel better, the things that we do to try to make ourselves feel okay. And that's so relevant, I think, to anybody who has been through religious trauma or deconstruction. So we are at Good Girls, Bad Days on Instagram, Threads, more social media to come. And that podcast will release on Wednesday, July 3rd.
And if correct me if I'm wrong, but you've recorded 2 episodes of this show already.
Yes.
Any previews on the topics, or are we just going to have to wait for that?
The first 2 episodes are going to be meeting Laura and getting more into my story. Stuff that hasn't come up on Leaving Eden, about my journey with grief and loss and other causes of PTSD other than religious trauma. And then in episode 3, I am not going to tell you what we're doing yet, but we are going to try our first wellness industry experiment. And I am so excited for what we're going to try and let you know if it works.
This is exciting. So you're doing almost like a Ono, Ross, and Carrie, we tried it so you don't have to.
Trying things is one of the things we're going to be doing.
Okay. I'm excited for this. I can't wait to hear it. I haven't heard any of these episodes yet. I'm just really I'm getting so pumped just thinking about it. I'm happy to see your next endeavor that you're going to go onto and do next. But don't worry, we're still doing this show.
Still here.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a really great compliment because on this show, what I talk about is so important and so absolutely vital and not something I'm ever willing to shut up about, but it's also so heavy. So I want to explore the other side of that. And what do we do when life is heavy? What do we do to deal with ourselves?
And I might have a similar announcement coming in the fall, but
Ooh.
going the opposite direction, not something heavier, something definitely lighter. Anyway,
What is lighter? What are you talking about?
Well, I think death and grief are heavier topics than.
Oh, I'd rather talk about death than religious trauma.
Okay, well,
that's way easier.
I think that's more about you liking to talk about death than.
Ooh, shots fired.
No, it's true. Death is one of Sadie's special interests, but details to come on that. I'm still getting things worked out with that, but that's going to be chomping at the bit to tell you guys about. But I'm really excited for Sadie's new show to come out. Yeah, it's going to be cool. I just now I guess it's time for us to thank our patrons.
Yep.
So I gave it all to your patrons. Your names are Kathleen Moncrief. Maybe I'm 1010. Maybe I'm 1010. Maybe. Melissa Manown, Melora King, and Todd Dale on behalf of his wonderful partner, Madeline Antrim. Thank you guys so much for subscribing at the I Gave It All tier of our Patreon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And now it's time for us to thank our Faith Promise Missions tier patrons. Your names are Alex P., Allie Allen, Autumn of Our Discontent, Brittany, Chrissa Walker, Dora J., Eleanor Donahue, Hannah Ross, Hannah Montana, Hope Norum, Horton Hears a Shane, Janine Collin, Jana Connor, Jay Nichols, Jen Kaharski, Jessica Tambo, Jonna, Junie B. Jones, and the B stands for Babadook, Kat Henwood, Kay Turwee, Kristen Marie, Learned Vixen, Linda Morgan, Madeline Antrim, Madeline Cusick, Maddie the Seventh Day Badventist, Marlena Stuve, Megan Arendt, Mary Martin, Morgan, Rob the Methodist, Stephanie Johnson, Steve and Amy, Susie, Tara McNamara, Wes the Cowboy, and Zoe Shuck. Thank you guys so much for subscribing at the Faith Promise Missions tier of our Patreon. You guys are the best in all the world.
Yeah, thank you so much to everybody who subscribes, not just at the I Gave It All and Faith Promise Missions tier, but at any tier on Patreon, and to people who support us in non-financial ways, like being active and helpful in the Facebook group and on our social medias, sharing us with friends and family in real life and on social media. All of those things help, leaving us positive reviews. All of those contribute to our show, and we are so thankful.
Do you want to do the TW, and then we'll get into it?
Sure thing. In general, we talk about a lot of potentially triggering topics on our show, including but not limited to suicide and mental health, racism, misogyny, PTSD and PTSD symptoms, child abuse, mental, physical, and sexual abuse, and spiritual abuse, including guilt, shame, and fear. In most episodes, we will mention at least a few of these topics, but we try to avoid any graphic detail unless it's relevant to the story that we're telling, and we do our best to give the audience a heads up before we get into that kind of detail if we do feel it's necessary for an episode.
All right, so we are here. We've got 4 Pride stories to read in this episode. Before we get into reading them, I want to say thank you to everybody the people who sent us a story. It's really, all of you are really brave people for being through what you've been through.
I love Pride story time of year because we've never gotten 2 stories that were exactly the same. Some years, I think last year we got like 20 stories.
We got so many. And
then this year we didn't get that many, but they were so good. The ones that we did get. There are always similarities. There is always something that I can relate to and that I think other queer listeners will relate to. There is always something new. I love these stories.
Yeah, I especially love this time of year because I get to hear directly from people whose life experiences are so different from mine.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the best ways that you can, just learn about the world and learn about other people is by, hearing from people whose lives are just way, 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 way different from yours. And whose experiences are way different from yours. And so that's one of my favorite things. Do you want me to start out? You're going to do the last one. So I'll do me, you, me, you. Is that good?
That sounds perfect.
Okay. So this one is from Sam, who uses they, them pronouns. So a little background. I was raised in an extremely controlling religious environment with my dad serving as the spiritual leader of our home and church. He is a Pentecostal pastor turned missionary turned I don't really know anymore.
Ooh.
I went no contact a year ago. Oof. Basically, I grew up homeschooled in the middle of nowhere, and the church was 2 steps from snake handling, tongues, prophecies, faith healings, and intense emphasis on spiritual warfare were all commonplace. The only things I knew about the LGBTQ community during my childhood were what I heard from my dad, and pretty much none of it was good. While he remained empathetic to an extent, he believed that queerness was a choice, celibacy the only option for a truly gay person to get into heaven, and that trans people were victims of psychosis. Oof. He also bought into the conspiracy theories about Hollywood being inherently evil machine bent on corrupting America and making pedophilia mainstream, and his homophobia began to kick into overdrive shortly after gay marriage was officially legalized. He made all of it seem reasonable, and so I grew up with a slightly modified version of those beliefs. I could never bring myself to speak as cruelly about queer people as I heard him, but I definitely held a ton of prejudice. Fast forward, we're living in Poland as part of my dad's God-given mission to teach the Catholics there about how to be real Christians. Ugh. Yeah, aka Pentecostal or Protestant. I have a best friend who speaks English and likes the same bands as I do. And when you're 14, that's basically all you need to fall in love. And fall I did, though I didn't realize it then. I used to daydream about our first apartment together, sharing coffee on a balcony somewhere in Krakow. Aw. I casually wondered if we could live together forever, if it would be a sin if we kissed. After all, that's not really sex, so maybe it doesn't really count as gay. Then I threw myself into church and promptly forgot about all the questioning I had. Ooh, rough. Fast forward again. I made my first IRL queer friends at my first secular job at 17 before starting college at North Central University, a Pentecostal college in downtown Minneapolis. Fun fact. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker met there, and the chapel they show in the movie about them is not what it looks like in real life. It's more like a medium-sized auditorium. One night, I'm joking around with one of my friends who had recently come out as a trans woman, and I mention my tomboyish qualities that I had growing up. She pointed out that a lot of what I described sounded like some kind of genderqueer situation, which I laughed off, and then Googled so I could continue joking about it. When I found the descriptions, I stopped laughing. Dun dun dun. Everything described sounded like me. I started down a rabbit hole, sifting through microlabels and learning about the trans and bi umbrellas for the first time. That little joke was the lightning bolt that made me realize that my dad might be wrong about something for the first time, and that I might be something other than a cishet woman. It horrified me, but I couldn't stop myself from pushing through my fear. I spent months scouring old message boards, theology discussions, and obscure Christian books about the subject I could secretly flip through in the library basement during chapel. I knew that if I were to come out, I could be expelled, since being queer is considered a violation of the moral code that all students are required to agree to before enrolling. The conflict between the things I felt and the things I was taught tore me apart for a long time. Fortunately, a time came where I was able to pull myself back together. Fast forward one last time. I'm roommates with my best friend who I recently realized I had a crush on. Aww. She was one of the first people at my school who accepted me on my journey, even though it went against the grain. I had finally settled on a label for myself, and naturally, that meant I felt compelled to get something to represent that. I chose a cheap button pin that featured a frog in front of the pansexual pride flag,
Cute.
which I smuggled onto campus. One day, my roommate suggests that we go for a walk to clear our heads from some homework fog. So I decide that it's time to debut my pin. I fasten it to a beanie and cover it with my hoodie until we get about a block away from campus. When I pulled my hood back, it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had been learning as much as I could about the queer community in the Twin Cities, and as I walked with my roommate slash best friend slash crush with that symbol on my head, as public as I possibly could be standing under the Viking Stadium, I felt an internal shift. I was no longer alone. I was a part of something beyond this little moment. And though the stories of the people who came before me, the people who couldn't do what I was doing, the people who couldn't in 2022. As my friend rushed laughing upstairs, I felt a deep sense of hope for the first time. Hope that I could find a way to feel that way forever. I guess I lied. One more fast forward up to today. I love these fast forwards. It feels like a movie. I'm now doing well as a student on a University of Wisconsin campus. I had my first sapphic love and heartbreak with the trans friend who started it all. Oh, I'm sorry, but rite of passage. And I'm going to my former roommate slash crush's wedding reception in July. I've undone a lot of harmful beliefs from my childhood and landed firmly in the spiritual slash witchy side of agnosticism. I support myself just like I always dreamed I would. And even though it's hard, I'm incredibly grateful that I chose the path I did instead of slipping into the trad wife path I had been placed on. Sorry for the massive wall of text. No need to apologize. This is your story. I'm not sure what the best format for submitting one of these is. Before I sign off, I just wanted to say I'm a big fan of the show. Relate a lot to Stady stories. Growing up as a pastor's kid, I'm thankful for everything you guys do because it makes explaining my background much easier. I can just point to somebody to a podcast episode as homework instead of having to find a way to make it sense in the moment. Thank you guys sincerely for what you do. Sam S. Thank you so much, Sam, for sending that story. That's a fantastic story. And we are so pleased to hear that you are, living a much more self-actualized life.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sending in your story. And that's coming all the way. Think about how they described their dad and being completely in the dark about LGBTQ people and had no idea that they were LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
And from that level of isolation, they came all the way to where they are now. I think that's really cool.
And considering that, the dates in the story, I know I'm Sadie and we're not old, but we're
my knees say I'm old.
Yeah, I am on cholesterol medication now, so that's how old I am. Yeah, got the
yikes.
You got to start on it early so you don't.
No, we're a little bit older than they are, and now we're getting these stories from slightly younger generations, and that's really cool.
Well, no, it's like we had with Andrew Pledger a couple weeks ago. Andrew's only half a generation younger than us.
Yeah.
But seeing this thing really started up when they legalized gay marriage across the country, and that was, if I recall correctly, 2015.
It was 2015.
I was in college. I was that was end of my senior year of college.
Yeah.
Then these dates of I'm doing this thing in 2022, and I'm like, whoa, that's recent. That's
yeah.
very recent. Like you get to our age, you snap your finger and it's like, oh, that was a year that went by. I completely forgot. Like,
when you get to our age.
Yeah.
No, I meant
early 30s.
early 30s. I noticed that Sam mentioned microlabels, and I thought that was a good thing to pick out to affirm about their story.
Do you want to explain microlabels to me?
Yeah, absolutely. So a label like non-binary is a big umbrella. It covers a lot of people. It can cover people who were AMAB who now identify as trans feminine, but don't identify as a woman. It can refer to people who are androgynous and feel like they have no gender. Non-binary can refer to people who are gender fluid and feel like they have all the genders or multiple genders. Non-binary refers to a lot of different people. And non-binary is a subset of transgender, which is the big label at the top that refers to anybody who is not cisgender, anybody who is not identifying as the gender that they were assigned at birth based on either their chromosomes or their genitals or both.
Wait, so hold on. I didn't know that non-binary was a subset of trans.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Oh, interesting. Huh.
And people experience that differently, right? Because some non-binary people identify strongly with being a part of trans community, and that's very important to them. And that's cool and valid and fine. And some non-binary people don't identify strongly with the label trans. They identify strongly with specifically non-binary. And that's cool and normal and fine. Trans is anything that is not cisgender, anything that is not, yes, my internal sense of who I am matches exactly perfectly with the sex that I was assigned at birth. And that can also, some intersex people would identify with that, or some intersex people would see themselves as a different designation, as intersex being different from trans. And I personally know intersex people who identify as trans or do not. So anyway, non-binary is anything that is not anybody who is not a man or a woman, a trans man or a trans woman, but their gender is something different. And then inside of non-binary, there are tons of microlabels. So you might hear microlabels like demigirl or demiboy.
Okay, I've heard of these, but I don't know what those are.
It just means sort of.
Sort of. Okay.
Yeah. Like people that identify as a demigirl, it might be, I know people who don't have an issue with the word girl being used about them, but kind of get the ick from woman or lady. Somebody like that might identify as a demigirl. And then some non-binary.
But they could be an AFAB demigirl.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now I'm getting it. So
or you could be an AMAB demigirl who is a trans feminine and who might also be a trans feminine person, but for whatever valid reason does not identify as a trans woman. They identify as a trans non-binary demigirl. And that's fine.
Okay.
And somebody like that might use she, her pronouns, or might use they, them pronouns, might use neo-pronouns, or might use a mix of she and they pronouns. Because somebody's pronouns, when we get into like these microlabels, especially with non-binary people, the microlabel that works for somebody does not necessarily always predict their pronouns. So within non-binary, you also have people who are gender fluid, who feel like some days their gender is man and some days their gender is woman, or some days their gender is demigirl and some days their gender is non-binary androgynous person. So microlabels, the reason that I picked it out of Sam's story to talk about it is that it's something that people who aren't immersed in the LGBTQ community can sometimes not understand. And I'm really glad that you asked me to explain it to you. What I always want to really, really focus on when I talk about microlabels is number one, we do not tolerate any bullying people based on their microlabels. Microlabels are a thing that some people will just get really down on people who use them and say, well, you don't need all those labels. All you need is just say that you're queer, or just say that you're non-binary, or whatever. Just say that you're a lesbian. You don't have to do sapphic this. Those are some microlabels that people will get really down on, and I hate that. I'm not a person who uses microlabels. I don't feel that I need them. I've looked into a lot of them and just didn't feel like that was something that was helpful to me. But I completely support and affirm people who use them. If you use 20 microlabels, you are good with me. And I will support, respect, and affirm all of them. It's something that just really gets on my nerves when people, it's something that younger LGBTQ people do more often, like my age and down. And it really, really bugs me when people are obnoxious about it, because if you need one word to describe yourself, like gay or bisexual, that's great and fine. And if you need 20 words to describe yourself, have 20 words. It bugs me when people come down on people who use a lot of microlabels.
So is the point of having microlabels to understand how to classify yourself, or is it more to like tell other people how to classify you? You know what I'm saying?
I think it can be both. I think.
Okay.
So a person who values digging into microlabels and finding that hyper-specific way to describe themselves might value it because they need words for themselves to describe themselves. Or they might value it because they're trying to explain themselves to somebody else. Or both. Either one of those is totally valid.
I guess you would run into trouble if you tried to explain your microlabels to somebody else and they have no idea what microlabels is.
Right. And there is like a stigma around microlabels, which is what I was telling you about. And it's just a soapbox of mine.
If it's useful for people, it's useful for people. It's not.
Right. So that's something that I always try to jump in and take up arms for as somebody who doesn't use microlabels for myself. Because I'm just passionate about it.
Or if younger people are mostly the ones doing it, do you think that's more of a function of this is like a newer advent? Like this is a newer thing that people have just figured out about now and have started using now? Or is it more of just like a younger people in like their teens and their 20s are more trying to figure out exactly where they, sit and trying to figure out who they are as a person before you get to that age where you're like late 20s, early 30s, when you're like, okay, I know who I am now?
I think it's a bit of both. And I think it also has to do with the internet and, in my generation, Tumblr was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is
and
why
now it's all moved to TikTok.
Right. Which is why it's stigmatized. And I don't agree with that, because it is a function of more young people. I think I've heard that something like 1 in 4 teenagers and college students now identify as something other than a cisgender heterosexual person. And that's incredible. I think that's great. But as there are all these people identifying as somehow LGBTQ plus, people are wanting to find their place on that spectrum. And I think, and having labels for ourselves feels good to a lot of people. Here's another example. I don't get a lot out of micro labels for my gender or my sexuality. But holy cow, dude, do you realize how much I micro label my theological and philosophical beliefs?
Oh, I'm aware.
Do you ever heard that you may say something along the lines of, well, I'm really more of a preterist historicist, non-Gnostic, non-Nicene, humanist Christian. Like, you've heard me say stuff like that.
Right. I know what all of those things are but like when you put them together, I'm like, oh, okay, that's
right.
very specific.
I
Yeah.
say like that all the time. I micro-label my theological beliefs.
And I'm just out here, I'm like, I'm a Jew.
Yeah.
And they're like,
So,
are you Orthodox? I'm like, no.
Yeah, not Orthodox. So, okay, so that's me. I'm just like, I'm bi.
I mean, that works.
It's the same thing, but I use microlabels for religion and philosophy all the time because it's important to me. It is important to me to pin down exactly where I am on the massive spectrum of different types of religious and philosophical beliefs. And as my own perception of myself on that spectrum changes, it becomes important to me to track exactly where I am and pinpoint where I am. So somebody who uses microlabels for their gender or their sexuality has that same want to explain themselves to themselves and potentially to other people just for a different part of their life.
I think of it kind of like metal bands.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like I feel like that's a good analogy because Meshuggah and Iron Maiden are both technically heavy metal, but Meshuggah doesn't sound like Iron Maiden.
Right. I'm sitting here wearing my Sylvain shirt. Sylvain is Norwegian folk black metal.
Yeah, which is different than a blackened Norwegian folk metal.
Yes.
No,
I was going to say The Who, but I don't think The Who is Norwegian. They are kind of folky, though.
Yeah, that's some songs. The thought that, Love Ain't for Keeping, that's kind of a folky song. I was also thinking about this when you were talking about, having the words to describe what you are makes understand, like it makes being able to identify something more easy. And that's also kind of like an etymological phenomena where if you look at like how languages develop, and back in the ancient world, I think I remember reading a story about this, that the first two colors to be identified in any language, if you look at like the early version of any language, if through archaeology, is going to be black and white, and then after that it's going to be red, and then after that it's going to be other colors in various orders, your greens, your yellows, your what have you.
Okay. So you have black and white, and then you have red, and then you have pink, and then you have magenta and lavender.
Apparently the last one that ever gets identified, or that ever gets a word for it, usually is blue. And so if you look at a lot of like ancient Greek writing, they won't say the ocean is blue, they'll say the ocean is wine dark. Like they're literally like they can see something and they can see that it exists, and they will use other words to describe what it looks like, but they won't have a word for it specifically. And there's even languages that I can't give you any off the top of my head, but I read that there are languages that are used where there still isn't a word for blue.
Wow.
Yeah. But if you went to those places and you used and you taught them a word for blue, I'm sure they would start using it all the time. Yeah. Or if you said these are, like, if you lined up a bunch of blue things in a row and you said these are all blue, then they would see that.
Yeah, that's an absolutely beautiful analogy. I read Sam's story, and I did not expect to like go all in on talking about microlabels today, but I'm really glad that I did, because it's something that I'm personally really passionate about.
Well, thank you for explaining that to me. Once again, this is why Pride Month is, or the Pride Stories episode is one of my favorite episodes to do all year, because I get to learn something new that I probably wouldn't have learned otherwise. So that's fantastic. Thank you for writing this story, Sam. Thank you for explaining microlabels to me, Sadie. Do you want to go take up the offering, and then we'll come back? We have, I think in our next segment, we're going to have 2 more stories, and then in the last one, Sadie's going to read a story.
Let's do it.
Hey, Sadie here. If this is your first time listening to the Leaving Eden podcast, make sure you go back and check out episode 57. It's a primer episode for new listeners. That episode tells my personal story and gives you all the terms and information that you'll need to know going forward. Also, check out our cult true crime series, The First Family of Fundamentalism, so that you can get the whole cult story. If you like our show, you can support us by joining our Patreon, where we have extended and uncensored episodes as well as other bonus content available. You can also join in the discussion in our Facebook group. That group is called Eden Exodus. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your worst enemy. The Leaving Eden podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
We are back from our break. Today it is Pride Stories Day. It's a great day.
Can I read the next one?
Yes,
Okay.
Go for it. It's all you.
Hey guys, happy Pride. My name is Laura. I'm a 23-year-old ex-fundy Southern queer woman. I'm married to my college sweetheart who came out as non-binary in fall 2023. Before that, we looked like a good Christian straight couple, but in reality, we're two lost and confused bisexuals, as we bisexuals always are, deconstructing fundamentalism together through our relationship. This is my first year where I feel like I can fully celebrate Pride. It has taken 7 years since my quote-unquote bisexual awakening for me to be out and proud and actually participate in Pride without any shame at all. It's been a journey, lots of ups and downs. A lot of the journey took place at a Southern Baptist university.
Oh no.
Now I'm still a Christian, but of a very different kind. Like many queer folks and many ex-fundies, it feels like I'm a teenager again in my 20s because I missed so many formative teenage experiences due to fundamentalism, parentification, and shame. At the same time, I feel like I've lived 20 years in the last 7. Tell me about it, Laura. Yeah, I've been there, done that. I'm in this weird place now where I'm discovering so much about myself for the first time, like most 20-somethings, but I'm also a mom to an 11-month-old. Being a parent has been a catalyst that has given me courage to define my own life. There were years when I wouldn't stand up for myself, but my fierce protectiveness for my daughter and my trans non-binary partner makes me unafraid to stand up for myself and my family. I feel like I exist in in-betweens. I'm a queer Christian, which many Christians and queer people find confusing for different reasons. I'm bisexual, which many people don't think is even a valid identity. But I love my life and I feel so proud of how far I've come. I'm finally in an affirming church and an inclusive community. I feel so much freer than I ever have in my life, free from fear and shame, and that's how I know I will never go back to the life I was raised in. I grew up hearing about joy, but I think I'm truly feeling it for the first time. Much love from a longtime fan of the show, Laura.
Laura, thank you for writing to us.
Okay, can you tell why I immediately did the last paragraph make you realize why I had to read that one? I feel like I exist in in-betweens.
Oh, yes.
And that resonated with me so much.
That's kind of life, though.
Yeah, and it's kind of a Pride Month, too, right?
Yeah.
Pride Month is for people who exist somewhere outside the experience that we were told is the norm. And of course, we reject the idea that a certain type of gender or sexuality experience is the norm, because all types of experiences are the norm. But Pride Month is for people who have had that experience. And for those of us who exist in that somewhere in the religious sphere and somewhere in the LGBTQ sphere, we can really feel like we exist in in-betweens. And that's what I've always wanted to do with this podcast, is just I don't need to explain or justify that I exist in the in-betweens. I don't need to prove to people that it's valid for me to exist in the in-betweens. But I like the idea of showing people, hey, this is where I exist.
Well, I think that's also very useful because one of the things that I think one of the hardest things for people to get their heads around when they're deconstructing is the lack of certainty.
It is really hard.
That there's no, because if you grow up fundamentalist, at least you have that certainty or they say you have that certainty, or you might be like, am I really saved? I don't know. And you might still have issues with that, but like there's no certainty of what's right, what's wrong. I don't know. You have to figure that out for yourself. Or, what do I believe? What do I not believe? I don't know. I need to there's no exact 100% right on the money answer, and you have to try to do the thing that feels like it's the right thing to do in that situation. And you have to be willing to live with the cognitive dissonance. And that's one of the hardest things that people have to deconstruct.
That to me felt like it required me to become a different person than I was when I was in the IFB. The person that I was as a fundie was so immersed in black and white thinking and being correct and having the right answer. And it was very much a conscious choice for me to work on giving up black and white thinking, work on giving up having the right answer to anything. And that was really, really difficult. And I absolutely still work on it. But it's been a fulfilling journey.
So other question that I had, when up at the top, when Laura says we're too lost and confused bisexuals, deconstructing fundamentals, and you're like, oh, we're all lost and confused bisexuals. Is that like a literally bisexuals are lost and confused, or is that like more of a metaphorical?
It's a joke, because that's what biphobic people say to bisexuals is, you're just a confused straight girl who wants attention, or you're just a confused lesbian. So it's a biphobia joke. Although it's a joke on two levels, because there is also a stereotype that LGBTQ people are bad at reading maps.
Interesting. I'm very good at reading maps.
And you are like the straightest person I know.
Really?
I mean, probably.
I mean, it's true. All your friends are big ol' homos.
Like who else I'm thinking of like anybody else.
I mean, I gotta be, there's gotta be like a token.
You're my token straight dude friend. I think I have some straight women friends. But I don't know.
No, but like I actually had to ask, because I'm not, as you could say, immersed in the culture. So I don't know about all the stereotypes. So there have been some things that you've said to me where you're like, oh, bisexual people can't sit in chairs properly. I'm like, is that a bisexual thing, or is that just like because I don't sit in chairs properly either, but it's because I'm tall and I can't get comfortable.
Yeah.
Does that make me bisexual?
No.
Or
that doesn't make you bisexual any more than a straight guy who paints his fingernails makes him gay. It doesn't change who you are, but I would say that sitting in a chair really, really funky is an act of allyship, perhaps.
Okay. And what was the thing about, and there was the other thing about having a bunch of cups.
Yeah, the other queer stereotype is having a bunch of drinks going at any given time, like a glass of water, a cup of coffee, and a seltzer, and a Starbucks drink or something.
Why would you do that? That doesn't make sense.
I don't know, but it does seem to play out. I'm sitting here, I have 1 cup of ice water, and this is the first, I cannot remember the last time I recorded with only 1 drink. I usually have at least water and coffee.
Well, yeah, but that's just 2. I feel like water and coffee is fine. Or if you have like, if you're at a restaurant, they pour you a glass of water and then you order either like wine or you'll have separate water and you'll have separate, like,
right.
If you order a cocktail. I'm also thinking about like if for toddlers have to have like, they have to have a juice box and a sippy cup and like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, unless they have a horrible mean mom like me.
Who only let them have one thing at once?
Yeah, sometimes 2, but that's where I draw the line.
Sadie, I think that you're coming out as a non-affirming parent.
Oh dear.
Anyway, it's time for me to read a story.
Yes.
This is officially gone off the rails.
Is that not what we do?
Yeah. That is what we do. So this one, TW for suicidal ideation, and close to following through. Yeah, so if that's triggering for you, maybe skip this one. I hope this finds you well. I do want to preface this and say that the story does not start off happy, but it does end that way. Okay, that's cool. I grew up in First Baptist Church of Hammond. Rough. We always heard from the pulpit that the gays are going to hell. So I didn't really start to see that I was different until about 7th grade. I didn't know what it meant at the time. And later, to my sophomore year at Hammond Baptist, I was obsessed with the Supernatural TV show. Maybe it was Jensen Ackles. I don't know. This is another thing, is that the number of like queer people that I know who really love Supernatural is...
I have actually never watched it. And a large part of that is because I feel like once I start, I'm not going to stop.
You're just going to get obsessed?
Yeah.
Anyway, but around the time of my junior year, I realized that I liked boys and girls. That year at school camp, there was a lot of purity culture being preached at the campground. And the summer between my junior and senior year, I had a suicide note written and I was home alone. I won't go into the details of how I had everything planned, but at that moment, I knew I wanted to live. Not for myself at that point, but out of spite. Here's the thing. Spite will keep you alive.
That is why I'm alive.
That is why the Jewish people have survived this long. Purely out of spite. Purely, I'm telling you, man, spite will keep you alive. It absolutely will. I had a close friend commit suicide when I was in 6th grade, and I didn't want my family to go through that, and I didn't want to give the pleasure to those that would see me fall. I decided to live out of spite. Fast forward to 2018, I came out publicly on Facebook, and I have been in a relationship with my partner for the past 5 years, 6 in September. I am honestly thrilled that I met him, and I don't know where I would be without him. He has meant so much to me when I first came out that year. P.S. To anyone who is going through a hard time and dealing with this type of trauma, I won't say it gets easier, but the dark times get less frequent and you learn how to handle them in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for writing to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This person is absolutely right. There is trauma that just doesn't go away. And I don't want to ever sell, my story of deconstruction at large as me being all better now. My trauma is all gone, because that doesn't happen. There is trauma that just does not go away ever. But the way that I would phrase it is you get tools in your toolbox to deal with those days, those moments, that trauma. You really get to a place where dealing with it is routine, where you understand how to take care of yourself and you are very aware of what you can handle on your own and what you need help for. And there's a sense of security that comes with that, knowing, okay, I know what being triggered is going to be like for me. I know that it is going to happen. I don't know when and where it's going to happen, and that's tough, but I've learned to cope with that inconsistency. I've learned to cope. I know that when I get triggered, it is almost always going to be a surprise, and I've learned to deal with that surprise, and I have tools in my toolbox to help myself deal with that surprise when it happens. And I feel very secure in knowing what I can handle myself and knowing where the line is of when I need help. And it is not the same as all healed, all better, everything's great and fine now. But there is a sense of security. There is a sense of wholeness of, okay, I know where I've been, I know where I'm going, I know how to determine when I need to reach out for help beyond myself. And I have faith in myself that I'll be able to reach out for help. And I have a pattern in the past of making that call correctly. And you just feel so much more secure in your ability to take care of yourself after a while. So I love that message of hope.
I love that message of hope. I love the fact that you are with us and that you have written us this letter, and that you are still alive as a person.
Let's stay alive together.
Let's stay alive together. I just want to talk a little bit about spite being a thing to motivate you to keep you going, because that is for real. Like, even if you're, even if it isn't as an extreme situation as this, doing something purely out of spite can be a thing that keeps you going through hard times and through hard moments and motivation. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you have any spite stories, Sadie?
Yeah. Pretty much everything that has happened in my life since April of 2016.
Wow.
Yeah.
What happened in April of 2016?
In April of 2016, I was hospitalized overnight for suicidal ideation. And I got out in the morning and I checked my phone and I realized that it was the birthday of somebody who had been really personally damaging to me. And that person was a milestone birthday for them. They were turning like a certain age as kind of a milestone. And I realized that that if I stayed alive, I could outlive them. And it was just a complete perspective changing moment for me.
Getting to live to see an age when your abuser is no longer around.
Like, I just realized, like, this person is a good few years older than me, and I can actually make the decision to not just outlive them, but live a better and more fulfilling life than I perceive they have. And actually, that's a pretty good reason to stay alive.
Trying to outlive, I mean, that'll work in the short term.
Sure.
Long term, maybe not.
Yeah.
Like, long term, that's a kind of thing that will eat you up inside. But I don't have any stories that are that extreme. The most extreme thing I can think of for myself is losing in sports. So I don't have any stories that are that extreme, but still.
No, it really can. And I think maybe one more thing to point out about my story is that started out as, well, it was a good thing because it kept me alive, but it maybe wasn't the healthiest motivation. Because I started off as, I'm going to outlive this person who hurt me and they're going to die one day. And then I graduated to, I'm going to live a better life. I'm going to be more altruistic. I'm going to help more people. I'm going to be a nicer person. I'm going to have nicer things than they do. And so that's healthier. Still kind of prideful and maybe not ideal. And then after that, I graduated to, I'm going to live the kind of life that I want to live for myself. And I'm going to value myself and value other people. So starting something out of spite it's always okay to start with less than great motivations, because you can hopefully graduate to better motivations down the road. I really loved the message of hope from this person who wrote in. I loved the message of hope from this listener who wrote in. He is absolutely right. The dark times get less frequent. You learn how to handle them in a healthy way. You grow and you improve, and you feel maybe you never feel completely secure or completely safe, but I will tell you, you get a hell of a lot closer. I don't know if 100% healing is in my future, but I know how far I've come, and I'm so thankful for it.
Let's go take up the offering again, and then there's one last story that Sadie's going to read. And
it has an analogy.
Yay, Sadie's Metaphor Corner comes back. We are back from our break. We have one last Pride story left to read. Sadie, would you like to do the honors?
I would love to. And we don't have... This is an anonymous listener, right? I will be sharing my Metaphor Corner with a listener for this Pride story, which is pretty cool. I think maybe this person is this person is very talented with metaphors. Hi, Sadie and Gavi. I've been listening to the Leaving Eden podcast for a few years now, and it has been so healing and validating to hear all of your stories. I know you probably get a gazillion emails, but I wrote this essay about my experiences a few weeks ago and felt the urge to share it in response to your call for Pride stories. For a bit of context, I'm bisexual, and during college I volunteered as a high school leader at a non-affirming church. My church claimed that they wanted to be a third-way church, meaning they weren't affirming of people being in queer relationships, but queer people were welcome. But what that really meant was we were allowed to be out as volunteers, but only if we agreed to be celibate and have our lives and beliefs constantly scrutinized. Even though it's not as extreme as having people screaming how God hates your sexuality, I hope this essay can help show the pain this kind of duplicitousness causes. Thanks for all you do. So this essay is called Stained Glass House. Being a queer person and volunteering in a conservative church is a bit like agreeing to live in a glass house. You sleep with your makeup on so you're presentable to God and to onlookers at all times. You scrub the counters until they're sparkling white. You take a toothbrush to the floors. You paint your unthreatening views on the windows for everyone to see. It's not much of a living. It's scary, anxiety-inducing, and when you find yet another stain, you have to decide whether to break your back to clean it or cover it with fig leaves. But this is accountability, right? This is just the price of walking the path to the narrow gate. It's not supposed to be easy, right? There are moments when you love it, when you remembered why you volunteered to live in this glass house in the first place. Moments when you get lost in the act of cleaning and you're not so focused on the people watching, or you're doing your best work and you hear a holler of praise at you from the onlookers. When you're told how good you're doing, how much you're appreciated. This life is hard, but it has its moments of reward. But still, your body can't handle this forever. You can feel yourself growing weaker by the day. It gets harder and harder to get up and do the same charade, say the same perfect things, smile the same big grin when your body hurts more and more. Finally, you say to the onlookers, "This isn't working. I can't do this anymore, not like this. I want to keep helping, but there need to be changes so I don't hurt so much." And they say, "Show us the proof." So you show them your hands, raw and damaged from so much bleach. They take a few notes. "Show us more proof." So you show them your kneecaps, bruised and bloodied from scrubbing the floors. They take a few notes. "Show us more proof." So you cut open your body, shatter your sternum, and show them the small, anguished heart with all its tired valves. "See? Look at it. Nobody else has to live in this house and work this hard. Why do I?" They take a few notes and get up to go decide your fate in a room where you aren't welcome. When they come back, they tell you they're sorry. They never intended for you to feel like this, and they're so sorry that you've been so hurt. They want things to change. They want you to feel better. Maybe they do see you. Maybe they do care. They're clearly sad this is how you feel. Maybe there's hope. But all they do is give you some band-aids and tell you this is how it is. That the path is narrow and it's hard. And yes, maybe you're the only one who has to live in a house like this, but they can't risk you undermining them. They can't risk you having a private life. It's too dangerous to have someone like you volunteering without this kind of accountability. They put a contract in your shaking hands and ask if you're up for another year. You're doing the Lord's work. Don't forget that. But you can't do it. You can't even hold the pen anymore. You're so beaten down. You're so exhausted. You're so tired of everyone observing you, but still not really seeing you, that you finally decide it isn't worth it. And it almost seems like they're relieved to hear you say that. Like maybe this parting is more mutual than you thought. You say your tearful goodbyes, Assure them you hold no ill will and pack up your things. None of the people you speak to that day will ever follow up to see if you're okay. After spending all that time watching you and having to look at your bloody wounds, they don't want to see you now. They don't want to think about you now. And now that you're out of the house, they don't have to. It's a better thing for me to think. I'm continuing this email.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Oof.
It's a bitter thing for me to think of my college church now. I'm so grateful for the friends I had, for the friends I still have, and for the many Tuesday nights spent working with high school kids. It was good work, and I still believe in what I did there. But to think of the way that a whole lifestyle just fizzled into the air with no care, no closure is painful. And I didn't even get the worst of it. Other queer leaders experienced far worse than me. I may have picked up a lot of self-loathing from my church growing up, but it never had the same kind of external surveillance and policing that my college church did, and that brought its own kind of trauma. It's so obvious in retrospect that the leadership just wanted us gone, or at the very least, the senior pastor wanted us gone. We were a persistent thorn in his flesh, and by the end of it all, our talents, dedication, and tithes just weren't worth it to him anymore. He didn't really care if his church's theology on human sexuality aligned with the broader denomination. He didn't really care if the practice of ruthlessly enforcing that theology was tearing his congregation apart. He just wanted it all to stop. I think of the conversations I had with him over coffee where I painstakingly shared my deepest wounds with someone who didn't deserve that kind of access to me. He used a lot of caring, flowery language in those conversations. He was always good with words. But the only thing I still remember from all those many words is this. If people aren't thriving here, we understand, and we encourage them to go elsewhere where they can thrive. We encourage them to go elsewhere. He said that numerous times to many of the queer volunteers. I guess he was trying to tell us all along that nothing was really going to change. I'm so grateful for the life I have now. I'm so grateful to have real privacy for what feels like the first time ever. No pastor watching me through my windows, no God peeking under my covers, and I've left behind the obligation to splay open my body for the benefit of others. I will tell my story to whom I want and when I want, and being forced out of a church forced me into a life that is beautiful and peaceful and mine. Truly, completely, divinely mine.
Wow.
I think for the remainder of the month of June, I would like to give my crown as monarch of the analogy corner to this person.
Okay, but you're taking it back.
I'm taking it back in July, yeah.
This is like a Cincinnatus situation.
It's a key to the city kind of situation. Yeah.
Okay, I get you.
No, that was maybe the best analogy that's ever been on our show.
I thought
that was up there.
Good. Yeah, I mean the whole thing where it's saying, well, technically you're accepted, but you have to follow these extra special rules that are only meant to apply to you, and you have to, and it's there's no presumption of innocence, it's a presumption of guilt, and you have to prove your innocence. That is, that's not a situation that I would wish on anybody. Yeah.
And it's not at all to come down on the person who wrote this letter, but I always encourage people to work through the ideas of this is better than what you went through or this is worse than what you went through. Because this isn't, I wouldn't frame it that way. I would frame this as this is different from what I went through. But it's still absolutely traumatic to be in this church that is maybe accepting but not affirming.
But if it's not affirming, is it really accepting? That's the
right. And that's the one other thing I wanted to highlight about this story. Affirming is a word that gets thrown around a lot, referring to churches. And I think sometimes people who are not as versed in church language might not know what it means. Or people don't define it well. People who use the word affirming don't define it well. And I certainly use that word about myself. So I want to define what it means when I say that I'm affirming. When somebody tells me that they are trans and they are a woman, I say, yes, you are. When somebody tells me that they are bisexual, I say, yes, you are. I affirm that. When somebody tells me that they are non-binary, I say, yes, you are. That's affirmation, is agreeing with a person when they tell you who they are. And that's how I define it for me. And that's how I think a church should define it. When somebody says, I'm trans, the church should... It's not affirming if the church says, well, that's okay that you think that. That's not affirming. Or I accept that you think that you're trans. That's not affirming. Affirmation is you say, yes, you are. So that's what I'm hoping for, is having that good and simple and clear definition of affirming in churches and in social groups and personally and everywhere.
Well, I was looking at this, and now that you've said that, I mean, this pastor, technically, he could be affirming in that he says, yes, you are a queer person, but he's also like, yes, you're a queer person, now please get the out.
Yeah.
Like,
now here's a million rules.
Is that technically affirming,
No.
or is that like, no, okay.
Because here's a million rules for your life because you're different than what I perceive to be the standard.
Okay, yes, but he does say, yes, you are a queer person.
I wonder if I should edit what I said to say yes and like in the sense of doing improv.
Yeah. Or maybe there has to be a thing that's beyond affirming. Like
I don't know. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, because I mean that's my thought. Because like on one hand, this pastor sounds like he's kind of a jerk. Like he,
sure.
he uses the nice language, and he's like, "Oh well, Jesus loves you," but also like you like your existence as a person is something that we feel like we have to police, or the way that you express your identity is something that we feel like we have to police. But also I don't want to act like I'm giving him props for anything, but I do feel like he said on the surface, "Yeah, we don't want you here."
Yeah.
If you like. Without actually having to kick somebody out and say we don't want you here, but he's saying
this is kind of the weaponized incompetence of pastoring, actually.
So he can't say, I mean, it's almost like the you know how in if you're in a relationship and you don't want to be the person who breaks up with the other person, then
I think you cut out
stop
again.
trying. And then I've never done this, but I've heard that it's a thing where it's basically like quiet quitting on your relationship, where you just stop trying and then just half-ass your way until your partner resents you so much that they break up with you, and then you can be like, they dumped me. I didn't see it coming. I just feel so down on myself right now, and play the victim. That's kind of what I see going on here, is that he can act like, oh, this person is only leaving because they're disgruntled, because they didn't want to follow the accountability, not because we ever told them that they weren't welcome here. They were welcome here, but they just weren't willing to, deal with the accountability. It's the same rules for everybody, obviously. It's the same rules. Like if I were bisexual, which I'm not, I would still have to follow these same rules. But, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not bisexual. Like,
I was thinking, and no, this guy isn't affirming, and I will tell you why.
Tell me.
When someone in his church says, I am straight and I am married in a heterosexual marriage, does he scrutinize them the way that he did this person to make sure that they're not committing adultery or having any affairs or doing anything else that would be anything less than straight and heterosexually married of them? Or when a volunteer says, I'm straight and right now I'm not married and I'm celibate, does this pastor scrutinize that person to make sure that they are living up to that as much as he scrutinizes this person who says that they are bisexual and celibate?
I mean, it's very obviously a double standard.
Right. So it's not affirming, because that pastor is, yes, you are, to when other people tell him who they are, when other people say, I'm straight and married, or I'm straight and not married and celibate, the pastor says, yes, you are. And when somebody says, I am bisexual and celibate right now, the pastor doesn't say, yes, you are. The pastor says, well, I better check up on that. So that's where he fails to be affirming.
That's an interesting point, and I get what you're saying there. I mean, he still does say, yes, you are bisexual, but he's just like...
But he's still not taking that person's word when they tell him about themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that it needs to be broader in order to be affirming.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely sounds really culty to me.
Yeah.
In trying to, limit people in that way, and trying to, police people's actions in that way, and trying to put like that level of scrutiny definitely seems like it's really culty to me.
And you saw, you heard how deep and nuanced and beautiful this person's analogy was that they wrote in the stained glass house essay. And that is so poignant to me. I think it's those of us who tried the hardest to make church work or make a certain belief system work that were hurt the most deeply by it. It's a deep respect that I have for other people who really, really tried to make it work, because people like us prove all the detractors to deconstruction wrong, because so many people will say, oh, you're just deconstructing because it's easy. You're deconstructing because you never cared about this ministry in the first place. You never cared about God in the first place. You were never a Christian in the first place. And people like me and people like this letter writer prove that absolutely wrong. It's those of us who tried the very hardest that often end up deconstructing.
Yeah. Oh, and that reminds me of something to say about the spite that we were talking about earlier, is that if you're doing something and you're and you have some idea about how the people who never accepted you, or the people who never liked you to begin with, are going to react to it, or if you're going to those people who never accepted you and never liked you to begin with, there's no way that you're ever going to be able to prove them wrong, because they're never going to change their minds. So this, you know what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but you can change the way that you think about yourself and that situation.
Right. The only way to really get out beyond it is to stop seeking their acceptance to begin with. And, if one of them wants to say something judgy, it's better to, either have a response that's just like either have no response, or just be like, yeah, I don't care.
And that is so much easier said than done.
Yeah. Because we all want that, that moment.
Yeah.
That
you made a big mistake. The Pretty Woman moment.
The Pretty Woman moment, or the sports moment where it's your rival that's and you go for the winning shot over your rival, and you drain the three, and then you hit the home run off of the pitcher, and then you do the bat flip and just be like, yeah, I got it.
Yeah. But I think we can make those moments for ourselves, because if you think back to Sam's story, the first story that we read, they put a pansexual frog pin on their beanie and walked around by the Viking Stadium. And that was a huge moment. That was it. That was their moment. And they made that for themselves.
Yeah, and that's better than any revenge.
Yeah. And we're all capable of finding those moments and creating those moments for ourselves. And I think what we're trying to do with Pride Month is empowering people to have those moments, whether it's writing into us or hearing something they relate to in a story, or it inspires them to go do something for themselves that they need to do. That's exactly what I'm hoping to do, is to encourage people to go make those moments.
Yeah. I mean, because, the pastor in the story, maybe in the future he will learn to accept queer people or to learn to affirm queer people. I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But you're not going to ever be able to show up to him and say, look at me, look what I've done, and browbeat him into agreeing with you. That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Not like, even in your wildest fantasy, that's never going to happen. And you're never going to get that validation from that person. And and accepting yourself is partially, I think, just learning to accept that you're never going to get that and being fine with it.
Yeah, and finding that validation internally, primarily, from yourself.
Anyway, I think that's a good note to end our Queer Stories, Pride Stories episode on.
These were so good. Thank you to all of our people who wrote in.
Next week is the Leaving Eden Drag Brunch with Dinah Housefire. So you'll want to show up for that. You'll want to tune in for that. And then after that, we've got fun stuff coming up for July and August. There's a documentary about a TikTok dance cult that's on Netflix that we're going to do in the beginning of July, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to finishing up Pride Month and getting on to our stuff for July. It's going to be really exciting.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can follow the pod at Leaving Eden Podcast on social media. You can follow Sadie at, let's see if I get this right. I've been listening to this for years.
4 years.
It's Sadie Carpenter Music on Instagram, at Hell Yeah Sadie on Twitter, and at Sadie Carpenter 1 on TikTok. Is that right?
That is correct. Nice job.
That is correct.
And I got yours. You can follow Gavi at GAVRIELHACOHEN
on Instagram.
On whatever on any social medias that he is present on, which is pretty much just Instagram.
And I never post anything except for pictures of cats and food. So you can follow me there. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.
But old rolling river of time, you've healed me in too many days. No regrets, no confusion, there'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided